Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts about maps, maps about rivers, and maps about things that, perhaps no one, has ever really cared to measure so gently. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist wannabe in the ancient history of maps. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those rare occasions when the details slip through the cracks of time like sand through a narrow hourglass. But even then, I prefer to drift quietly onward, rather than fuss too much. Because what truly matters is not whether these ancient stones and scrolls are perfectly understood, but the calmness that comes from holding them in our slow and careful thoughts. Before I start, please, let me know, what is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode with the oldest maps in the world. The Saint-Bélec Slab, from around 1900 BC, waits for us first. It is not a map carved on paper or drawn with ink, but on a large slab of schist stone, carefully etched with winding lines and gentle shapes. This stone was found in Brittany, France, and its patterns are thought to represent the valley of the river Odette. Imagine someone, thousands of years ago, scratching careful ridges and depressions, not for beauty alone, but perhaps to describe where water flowed, where valleys stretched, and where land could be crossed. The slab measures about 2.2 meters in length, which is quite large and heavy, nearly as if it were never meant to be moved often, but rather to stay in place as a quiet record of the land. Scholars note repeating motifs, geometric designs, and a system of markings that may have corresponded to settlements, burial mounds, or cultivated fields. Some lines curve gently like the meander of a stream, others break abruptly, like cliffs or edges of terrain. You may not care about the exact depth of these carvings, or how each groove is between a few millimeters and a centimeter deep. And yet, that is the kind of detail that rests quietly in the stillness of history. Let us drift, ever so slowly, to the Turin Papyrus Map. By around 1150 BCE, in the time of ancient Egypt, scribes painted on papyrus a document sometimes called the oldest surviving topographical map in the world. This papyrus, over 2.5 meters long, depicts a stretch of desert near Wadi Hammamat, where stone was quarried for monuments. Unlike the stone slab in France, this was made with ink, using colors of black and red, to mark features such as roads, hills, streams, and quarry sites. One can see shaded shapes to suggest the presence of mountains, with inscriptions describing gold-bearing veins and stone resources. The papyrus even records the location of a temple and details the direction of travel to reach it. What makes this endlessly fascinating to the slow-minded sloth is not the grandeur of Egypt itself, but the sheer practicality of such a map. It was not art for the eye alone. It was guidance for workers, a utilitarian tool, patiently drawn with straight edges and gentle curves. The papyrus has survived millennia, rolled, unrolled, studied, and restored. Each fiber of papyrus, laid side by side, still whispers the texture of reeds pressed flat along the Nile, and somehow still carries instructions from 3,000 years ago. Let us float gently onward to Babylon. Around 600 BC, the Babylonians created what we call the Imago Mundi, the Babylonian world map. Unlike the detailed Egyptian papyrus, this is a clay tablet, inscribed with cuneiform, now housed in the British Museum. The map shows a circular world, centered on Babylon itself, with the Euphrates River flowing through it. Surrounding the circle is a ring labeled as the Bitter River, which we believe to mean the cosmic ocean encircling the known land. Inside, one sees small triangular marks pointing outward. These are thought to indicate distant, unknown regions, perhaps mountains, mythical places, or lands beyond the familiar. The entire clay tablet measures only about 12 centimeters across. So small. You could cradle it in your hand as you drift to sleep. And yet, on this tiny surface, ancient scribes attempted to capture the enormity of the world. The cuneiform signs record place names, regions, and concepts of geography mingled with myth. The rivers and mountains drawn were not precise, not like a modern atlas, but symbolic, a mixture of observation and imagination. This fact is not exciting. Not even a little bit. And that is just perfect. Let us drift now to its close relative. Also around 600 BCE, another Babylonian world map was carved, often considered the map of the world, similarly portraying a circular land with Babylon at its center. Like the Imago Mundi, it reduces the world into a disk surrounded by water. This map, too, places 7 outer regions beyond the ocean, depicted as pointed triangular shapes. Scholars note that these outer areas are described with a blend of fact and legend, mountains with impossible beasts, lands of eternal darkness, or distant mythological features. Such maps tell us less about precise geography, and more about the human need to order, categorize, and imagine the unknown. On clay hardened by fire, preserved for over 2.5 millennia, these simple lines remind us how ancient people saw their place in the cosmos. The circles, the rivers, the little wedges of land, all etched so quietly, yet carried forward into our present. And so we see, from stone slab to papyrus sheet, from clay tablet to mythical sketch, maps were never only about land. They were about memory, meaning, and the slow passing of knowledge across time. Somewhere in the quiet folds of medieval memory, there lingers mention of the lost Bobbio world map, created around the year 600 of the Common Era. This map itself no longer rests in the hands of scholars, for the original has long slipped away, leaving only echoes preserved in the later Tournai copies that survive. These copies, crafted with a slower hand, remind us of the map's basic outlines, a schematic vision of the world drawn in a style known as a T-O map. Within this structure, the circle of the earth was gently bisected by a T, dividing the lands into 3 known parts, Asia, Europe, and Africa, with the great waters of the Mediterranean and surrounding seas carefully separating them. The Tournai manuscripts reveal that Jerusalem rested at the center, reflecting a worldview both spiritual and geographical. The orientation was often to the east, with sunrise aligned at the top, giving the map a sense of upward light rather than northern precision. What remains so quietly remarkable is how the copies carry not only the shapes, but also the slowness of thought from the earlier centuries, each curved line a continuation of a tradition rather than an invention of its own. In this way, the lost Bobbio map survives through absence, as if reminding us that knowledge does not disappear, but lingers in traces, faintly preserved by scribes who never expected their careful drawings to be studied so closely 1,000 years later. Drifting gently eastward in time, one encounters the Dunhuang Chinese star atlas, carefully painted onto a long roll of paper sometime around the year 649 CE, during the Tang dynasty. Preserved in the famed Dunhuang cave libraries along the Silk Road, this document is often called the oldest complete star atlas in existence. It unfurls across nearly 2.5 meters of length, presenting close to 1,350 stars, arranged into constellations with patient attention to order. The atlas contains 12 vertical panels, each showing a section of the sky, along with one larger chart dedicated to the North Polar region. Red and black inks distinguish stars of different categories, while carefully brushed captions name constellations that formed part of Chinese celestial tradition. The stars are not placed by mere imagination, they reflect careful observational astronomy, aligned with records from imperial court astronomers who tracked celestial cycles with methodical precision. Unlike maps of land, which sketch mountains and rivers, this map of the heavens arranged a dome of glittering points into patterns that guided calendars, rituals, and interpretations of fate. It is not only a scientific document but also an artistic one, its delicate lines and colored points giving it a softness as if the night sky itself had been gently rolled into a scroll. In its survival, discovered centuries later in the silence of a sealed cave, it shows us how even the most fragile of paper, hidden in sand and stone, may preserve the slow patience of ancient eyes gazing upward. Moving further onward, one may rest a while upon the traces of another absence, the lost maps of the Holy Land and Asia, created in the late 8th century, around the year 780 CE. These maps, once vivid in their detail, have faded into shadows, surviving only as palimpsests within the Turin manuscript tradition. A palimpsest, as you may already know, is a reused manuscript, where earlier writing or drawings were scraped or washed away to make room for new words. And yet, beneath the surface, the faint lines remain, whispering of a time when the Holy Land and distant Asia were rendered for pilgrims and scholars who sought order in geography and faith alike. Though much is obscured, we know these early maps were schematic, more diagram than survey, placing biblical places with quiet precision among mountains and rivers drawn for spiritual rather than navigational use. They attempted to show lands sacred to Christianity alongside the wider world stretching east, marking rivers, seas, and cities that now rest under layers of rewritten parchment. Their ghostly presence beneath later text is like the dim echo of a star no longer burning, yet still visible to the eye. In this way, the lost maps of the Holy Land and Asia remind us that knowledge often rests in fragments, only partially revealed, half forgotten, yet still able to slow our thoughts into wondering about hands that once traced lines that few would see again. And then, by the year 1154, one encounters a creation of extraordinary endurance, though for centuries it remained lost to European eyes, the Tabula Rogeriana, drawn by the geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi for King Roger II of Sicily. Unlike the schematic circles of earlier maps, this one stretched to 6.5 feet in length, a grand rectangle filled with descriptions of rivers, mountains, roads, and cities across much of the known world. Al-Idrisi gathered reports from merchants, travelers, and earlier scholars, compiling them into both a detailed written geography and this great map, drawn with southern orientation at the top, a tradition of Islamic cartography. The map extended from the Atlantic coasts of Europe and Africa across the Mediterranean, deep into the Middle East, Central Asia, and as far as the distant lands of China. It recorded islands, trade routes, and the flow of rivers, carefully cross-checked with narratives collected at the Sicilian court, itself a meeting place of cultures. The Tabula Rogeriana was preserved in manuscript form, copied, and studied, though the original silver disc version has been lost. For centuries, its precision was admired quietly, before fading from common memory until rediscovery brought it again into view. Each curve of coastline, though imperfect by modern standards, reflected the patient accumulation of human observation, where knowledge was stitched together slowly, detail by detail, like threads in a tapestry. It remains a testament not to haste, but to careful assembly, a cartographic lullaby written in ink, meant to be read slowly, and never rushed. Resting within the folds of the 13th century, around 1260, the Psalter World Map appears as a delicate little vision of the world, tucked into a small English Psalter manuscript now resting in the British Library. Unlike the sprawling wall maps meant to impress, this one is just about 15 centimeters across, yet it contains the entire medieval cosmos arranged with devotional intent. It belongs to the tradition of Mappa Mundi, circular maps where East is at the top, and Jerusalem is positioned as the heart of creation. Around the circle, Christ himself is often depicted, his hands and feet anchoring the world in divine order. The map presents Europe, Asia, and Africa, each filled with schematic rivers and mountains, alongside small drawings of towns, biblical sites, and imagined creatures at the margins. Although its scale is miniature, its symbolism is vast, merging geography with theology in one continuous, almost meditative surface. The Psalter map also includes echoes of older T.O. designs, but with the embellishment of careful artistry, painted in soft colors that have dimmed with time. What makes it soothing to reflect upon is the way it condenses the infinite into a tiny circle, meant not for navigation across seas but for navigation of thought and prayer. Like a pebble carried in one's pocket, its smallness holds weight, and its presence offers a quiet glimpse into how the medieval mind ordered the world in soft strokes of ink and faith. Further into this century, around 1265, we encounter the Tabula Rogeriana, not a circular map of symbolic theology, but instead a long, stretched-out parchment showing roads across the Roman Empire. Though the surviving copy is medieval, its contents derive from much earlier Roman cartography, a reminder of the endurance of knowledge. The scroll itself, over 6 meters in length, unrolls like a patient thread of geography, but astonishingly narrow, only about 34 centimeters high, as if the world had been pressed flat into a ribbon. It is not drawn to scale in any modern sense, but rather schematically, with cities represented by little roofed buildings, mountains by serrated lines, and rivers by winding strokes. The Mediterranean appears more as a band than a sea, stretched to accommodate the road networks that link place to place. More than 500 towns are marked, along with distances carefully noted in Roman miles, so travelers could imagine how far to journey along imperial routes. Though distorted, the map preserves the bones of Rome's infrastructure, a cartographic memory of roads that bound together Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. The version we hold today, copied by a monk in the 13th century, is thought to descend from a late Roman or early medieval exemplar, carrying within it the echo of antiquity. To study it is to wander slowly along roads that no longer exist in their original form, yet still whisper across parchment like faint tracks in the dust of history. Not long after, around the year 1285, one finds the Hereford Mappa Mundi, the largest surviving medieval world map, still preserved in Hereford Cathedral in England. Measuring about 1.58 meters by 1.34 meters, it covers an entire calfskin sheet, crowded with places, peoples, and scenes. This great map follows the T.O. pattern but expands it into a canvas where theology, history, and geography merge without boundary. Jerusalem is at the center, Christ sits above, and at the eastern edge, paradise is shown, radiant and unreachable. More than 1,000 inscriptions and drawings populate the surface, cities, rivers, mountains, biblical events, classical stories, and mythical creatures all find a home within its lines. The Red Sea is painted bright red, mountains are shown as little teeth-like ridges, and Britain lies tucked to the lower left, small but carefully inscribed. Unlike the Psalter map, this was not just for private devotion but a public display, inviting clerics and pilgrims to gaze upon the totality of creation as imagined in the late 13th century. Each word and drawing was not intended for quick reference but for contemplation, a reminder that maps can serve as encyclopedias of culture as much as guides of terrain. To stand before it is to feel a vast, almost overwhelming stillness, where all of known and imagined history rests side by side, framed by the steady patience of vellum that has endured centuries. Into the turning of 1300, the scholar Maximus Planudes undertook a task of revival, reconstructing the lost maps of Claudius Ptolemy from the ancient world. Planudes, a Byzantine monk and scholar in Constantinople, did not have the original maps from Ptolemy's Geographia, which had been composed more than 1,000 years earlier, in the 2nd century. Instead, he gathered Ptolemy's surviving text and mathematical instructions, using them to piece together a representation of the known world. What emerged was the earliest extant attempt to reconstruct Ptolemy's vision, a map that projected the Earth as a sphere onto a flat surface, a careful, almost geometrical undertaking compared with the symbolic Mappae Mundi. Though the surviving fragments of Planudes' map are not as extensive as later Renaissance versions, they mark a turning point, a moment when Greek mathematical geography was again given shape in ink. His reconstruction shows the Mediterranean with greater accuracy than medieval symbolic maps, and it stretches east toward India and Sri Lanka, reflecting the detailed coordinates preserved in the Geographia. The work of Planudes reminds us that maps are not static pictures but evolving interpretations, and his careful drawing represented the beginning of a renewed dialogue with ancient science, placed delicately within the intellectual world of Byzantium. In its slow precision, it demonstrates how knowledge can be lost, recovered, and reshaped, drifting across centuries like a current that never quite disappears. By the early 15th century, around 1402, a remarkable East Asian creation appeared, the Gangnedo, or map of integrated lands and regions of historical countries and capitals. Made in Korea during the Joseon dynasty, this map drew upon both Chinese and Islamic sources, offering a synthesis of world geography as understood in East Asia at the time. It places China prominently at the center, with Korea carefully drawn nearby, while Japan is shown to the east. To the west, the map stretches across India, Central Asia, and even Africa, a rare inclusion that reflects the influence of Islamic geographical knowledge transmitted through Yuan China. The Gangnedo is notable for its scale. It is large, more than 3 meters wide in surviving copies, and for its blending of practical information with symbolic representation. Though coastlines are simplified and distorted, the very presence of Africa and the Middle East reveals the broadening horizons of Korean cartographers. The rivers, mountains, and cities are painted with delicate brushwork, inscriptions filling the spaces with quiet detail. This was not only a geographical document but also a cultural statement, situating Korea within a vast world that stretched outward in every direction. Its survival allows us to glimpse a moment when maps were bridges of knowledge, carrying ideas across continents, folded carefully into brushstrokes on silk and paper. In its stillness, the Gangnedo rests like a great net, gathering lands and seas into a single woven image. As the year 1436 approaches, we come upon the work of Andrea Bianco, a Venetian mariner and cartographer whose world map is one of the earliest preserved from Renaissance Italy. His map, drawn on parchment and part of a larger atlas, reveals a blend of medieval tradition and the fresh stirrings of more scientific geography. It shows Europe, Africa, and Asia with increasing attention to proportion, reflecting growing knowledge from travelers and merchants who carried stories of distant coasts. The Atlantic islands, including the Canaries and Madeira, are drawn with careful shapes, while the Mediterranean is rendered with notable accuracy. Bianco's map includes gridlines of latitude, a quiet nod to Ptolemaic methods that were re-entering European thought, even as his style still leaned on medieval symbolic convention. Africa is shown extending southward, though not yet encircling the Cape, while Asia stretches broadly to the east. The map was practical for sailors, yet it still carried the softness of hand-drawn lines, shaded coastlines, and annotations that seemed as much conversation as measurement. What makes Bianco's work so tender is how it reflects transition, between old and new, between symbolic worldviews and empirical cartography, between medieval imagination and Renaissance precision. To gaze at it is to see a world not yet fully known but steadily unfolding, each bay and cape like a whisper of discovery, placed with patient ink upon the surface of vellum. Drifting into the mid-15th century, one finds the expansive manuscript of Francis Moro, produced in Venice around 1450 by the Camaldolese monk Francis Moro, a careful hand-painting around planisphere on calfskin nearly 2 meters across, each inch filled with small inscriptions, illustrations, and the slow patience of many sources. The map is oriented with south at the top, a convention echoing Mediterranean and Arabic cartographic traditions, and this orientation asks the viewer to unlearn habitual directions and rest their gaze differently, following coastlines that curve like gentle breaths across the page. It was compiled from travelers' reports, earlier charts, and learned scribes working within the monastery on Murano, where ink and pigment met the quiet life of the cloister. Here one sees not only coasts but annotations about currents, trade routes, and places that mattered to merchants and pilots. The surface is crowded yet exacting, a tapestry of place names and small vignettes, mountains rendered as tiny teeth, port towns marked with little houses, each element meant to be read slowly, not hurriedly. There is also an evident debt to Arabic geography in the map's framing and some of its source material, a reminder of the layered knowledge the Mediterranean carried. Hold this map in the imagination as if you might press a thumb to vellum and feel centuries of careful thought, breathe with cartography's gentle aging. In a hush of parchment and compass points, the 1455 nautical chart attributed to Bartolomeo Pareto emerges from Genoa as a singular, ornate relic, the sole surviving chart linked to this 15th-century priest cartographer, painted with measured coastal outlines and a flourish of decorative emblems that mark ports, capes, and curious islands. Scholars date it to 1455 and note its hybrid character. Portolan rum lines and wind roses cross the sheet while imaginative labels and pictorial ships and monsters border the seas, telling maritime stories and offering navigational cues in the same gentle breath. The chart's style is very much of the Mediterranean mariner's world, where compass bearings, coastal detail, and mnemonic imagery sit together. It shows the Adriatic, parts of the eastern Mediterranean, and extends information gathered by pilots and local knowledge into ornamented annotation. There are curious toponyms and even references to legendary islands in the Atlantic. Antilia features among these legends, an echo of sailors' talk around lamps and the maps they trusted or feared. This single surviving work gives us a whisper of Genoese chart-making, an intimate talk between ink and coastal memory, where lines meant for steering and scribbles meant for storytelling coexist. It whispers both practical guidance and stories sailors murmured around lanterns softly. Across the narrow crest of the Mediterranean, the anonymous Genoese world map of 1457 spreads a careful and hybrid vision that scholars describe as transitional between medieval mappa mundi and emergent, more empirical charts, blending symbolic zones with Portolan detail and even incorporating contemporary traveler reports such as those of Niccolò da Conti. Dated to 1457, the map gives surprisingly balanced proportions to continents compared with earlier, more schematic drawings, and it draws on a mixture of sources, classical lore, recent reports from merchants and travelers, and the Portolan tradition of coastal precision. The composition often places familiar liturgical and historical sites alongside commercial ports and nautical notation, producing an image that functions as both cosmography and practical reference. On this sheet, mountains, rivers, and cities are rendered with small, careful strokes. Marginal images remind viewers of biblical or natural curiosities, and the inclusion of a modern traveler's intelligence marks a slow shift toward empiricism in mapmaking. There is even the delightful, slightly puzzling depiction of a three-masted European ship in eastern waters, a tiny anachronistic flourish that invites historians to lean in and smile. Its surface includes towns, decorative sea monsters, and the unusual depiction of a three-masted European vessel in the Indian Ocean, a small puzzle for patient historians. In the hush of Atlantic light, the world chart of Juan de la Cosa, completed in 1500, arrives as the first known European map to show the coasts of the Americas, a stitched-in painted nautical chart assembled after voyages that reshaped European horizons. De la Cosa, who sailed with Christopher Columbus and later captains, drew a chart that integrates the newly encountered Caribbean and parts of South America with the older known coasts of Europe and Africa, rendering the Atlantic not only as ocean but as a stitched seam between worlds. The chart is a product of immediate experience, coastlines traced from memory and logbooks, place names recorded where pilots had set anchors, and it carries the Portolan rhythm of rum lines and wind roses to aid sailors in steering from cape to cape. Its depiction of the New World is cautious and coastal, not yet an interior continent, and it predates the naming of America by several years, thus it occupies a peculiar and tender historical moment when discovery was becoming cartographic knowledge. Today the chart is preserved in Madrid, where conservators and scholars study its annotated shores and the compass work of early global encounter. It rests in Madrid, where scholars study its annotated shores. Floating like a coastal breeze, the Contino planisphere of 1502 unveils the freshly charted edges of an expanding world, a Portuguese product that captured voyages along Africa, across the Atlantic to Brazil, and along the sea routes toward India, all painstakingly sketched by an anonymous cartographer and spirited out of Lisbon by the agent Alberto Contino to the court of Ercole d'Este in Ferrara. This planisphere blends portolan lines with bold coastal silhouettes, showing the Atlantic islands, the new Brazilian shores, West African coasts, and the beginnings of an Indian Ocean circuit in enough clarity that it communicated strategic knowledge about navigation and colonial expansion. Contino's map was prized because it represented closely guarded Portuguese discoveries, information that Portuguese authorities seldom allowed to leave royal repositories. The map's export to Italy, by purchase or smuggling, made it a rare and intoxicating window into secret state knowledge. On the sheet, place names and painted coastlines coexist with decorative compass roses and notes about winds and distances, a map meant for both admiration and utility. Its painted shores and carefully inked place names remained closely guarded state knowledge before Contino's daring export, and now they whisper cartographic secrets softly. Softly turning from Atlantic charts to Ottoman ink, the Piri Reis sheet of 1513 appears as a fragmentary, eloquent record compiled by the admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, who noted in his marginalia that he had consulted many earlier charts, including maps said to be derived from Columbus, and combined them into a portolan-style world map of which roughly one-third survives today in the Topkapı Palace collections in Istanbul. Dated by Piri Reis in 1513, he records the year in the Islamic calendar. The surviving piece measures about 90 by 63 centimeters and shows parts of the Atlantic, the western coast of Africa, and the newly mapped shores of South America and the Caribbean, with wind roses and rum lines that speak the language of pilots and navigators. Piri Reis explicitly lists his sources, claiming to have used numerous earlier maps, some European, some Arabic, and this patchwork method explains both the map's usefulness and its occasional puzzling incongruities. The sheet is drawn on a fine animal skin and is richly annotated in Ottoman Turkish, making it both a working nautical tool and a curious historical palimpsest of transmitted knowledge. Its gazelle-skin surface, wind roses, and rum lines invite slow study and wonder softly. A hush of sea salt and lamp glow gathers around the Dieppe maps, those mid-16th century charts born in the little port town of Dieppe in Normandy, where between the 1540s and the 1560s a small school of French cartographers, Pierre de Selliers, Jean Rotz, Guillaume Letestu, and their colleagues, painted large, richly decorated world charts on vellum for wealthy patrons and royal cabinets. These sheets unfurl with artistry, coastlines brushed in confident strokes, inset ports labeled in neat script, painted ships and compass roses that might almost rock if you tipped the page, and marginal scenes that tell of trade, voyage, and rumor. They blend portolan practicality with courtly ornament. The rum lines that help a pilot steer across the sea sit beside cartouches and mythic islands whispered about by sailors. Some maps record Atlantic coasts and early reports of the Americas, while others hold Mediterranean lore passed hand to hand. Pause now and notice the vellum's feather soft grain imagined beneath your fingertips, the pigments mellowed to mossy tones, and tiny place names like beads along a string of memory. Some originals survive in museums and libraries, others are known only through copies and references that hum of lost sheets. These maps comfort the slow mind because they are part epic, part inventory, a stitched archive of pilot talk, merchant knowledge, and decorative care, where the geography of coasts meets the geography of imagination, and a gentle human curiosity preserved. In a quiet room of compass and calculation, the year 1569 introduced Mercator's world map, produced by the Flemish geographer Gerardus Mercator under a long Latin title that promised an improved representation of the terrestrial globe adapted for navigating sailors. What quietly distinguishes this sheet is the projection it introduced, a conformal cylindrical transformation now named for Mercator, which renders compass bearings as straight lines so mariners could follow steady rum lines across open water. This made directions easier to plot while gently stretching high-latitude regions so that polar lands look elongated compared with equatorial belts. Breathe softly on the idea, mathematical ingenuity converted into engraved plates, parallels spaced to follow logarithmic spacing that preserves angles, and rhumb lines radiating like the careful spokes of a slow wheel. The result was a map that traded true relative area for navigational clarity, a useful compromise for sailors whose priority was bearing rather than area, and it circulated broadly in subsequent charts and atlases because its practicality suited long-distance seafaring. Imagine copper engraved with patient strokes, printed sheets distributed among pilots, and a single geometric insight quietly reorienting how the mariner's eye read distance and direction, a shift that persisted as an accepted nautical standard for centuries. A hush of ink and silk frames. Matteo Ricci's Kunyu Wanguo Quantu of 1602, the Jesuit-produced Chinese world map that gently translates European geographic forms into Chinese script and visual order at the request of main court audiences. Carved and printed as a multi-panel woodblock image, this map assembled the outlines of the Americas, Africa, Europe, and Asia into a single Chinese visual field, introducing many readers in China to a new, global perspective rendered with local aesthetic care. Chinese collaborators such as Li Zhao assisted with technical work and translation, and the resulting sheet adapts European cartographic conventions, longitude-latitude thinking and continental outlines, into the vocabulary of Chinese cartography, so place names read in characters along painted coasts like a string of small lanterns. Pause a moment and imagine the long panels joining like slow breaths, the woodblock impressions carrying the tactile whisper of grain and ink, and the map serving as both scientific import and cultural conversation. It did not simply impose foreign forms but translated them, making them speak in Mandarin and in the scholarly idiom of the court. In that careful exchange the map quietly widened horizons, showing how knowledge passes not only by ships and logbooks but through patient collaboration and respectful adaptation of forms. A soft turning of presses and pages introduces Blaeu's cartographic world, and around 1635 Joan Blaeu began publishing atlases in Amsterdam, following the workshop of his father Willem, and over the subsequent decades he and his firm elaborated a vast atlas project that culminated in the celebrated Atlas Maior in the 1660s. The Atlas Maior, issued in its great form between 1662 and 1665, unfolded as a multi-volume cosmography produced in several language editions and containing hundreds of engraved maps, descriptive text, and decorative cartouches that speak of the Dutch Golden Age's appetite for geographic order and learned presentation. Imagine the engraved plates as little theatrical stages, provinces, rivers, and cities arranged with typographic care, coats of arms like quiet signatures, and folios that invite slow reading rather than hurried consultation. Because of fires, changing fortunes, and the fragmentary survival of certain printings, some editions and intended volumes are incomplete or rare, making particular copies precious to collectors and scholars, yet the surviving sets still exude the calm industry of a workshop where engravers, editors, and patrons conspired to fix a measured world into the patient medium of paper. The Blaeu atlases feel like grand cabinets of knowledge, maps and texts assembled not in haste but with the soft certainty of a learned press. A measured hush falls over the Klencke Atlas of 1660, a towering and ceremonial book produced in the Netherlands and presented as a gift by a consortium of merchants to King Charles II of England upon his restoration, an object that reads like a diplomat's offering and a merchant's catalogue of global reach. This atlas is astonishing for its scale, a unique, wall-sized compilation of hand-engraved maps that opens like a pair of hanging panels, intended to be removed and displayed on walls rather than consulted as an ordinary folio, and it contains large copperplate maps of the continents in various states that together embodied the geographic knowledge and commercial ambitions of its makers. Commissioned by merchants represented by Johannes Klencke and executed by skilled engravers, the atlas functioned both as a prestige object and as a subtle appeal for favorable trade arrangements, a slow and ceremonial way to show the monarch the scope of Dutch navigation and enterprise. Imagine lifting its heavy covers with careful hands, sweeping continental outlines spread across broad sheets, finely engraved coasts, and the quiet geometry of measured seas, an object of spectacle and practical pride. Conservators and scholars now steward it within national collections, approaching the pages with the deliberate gestures of those who know that some books demand reverence in time rather than quick perusal, and in its vast stillness the Klencke Atlas remains a cartographic offering shaped by diplomacy and patient craft. In the soft hush of the late 17th century, around 1670, the Britannia of John Ogilby emerges as the first road atlas of Britain, a patient, detailed attempt to capture the entire network of roads stretching across England and Wales. Each route is rendered meticulously on individual sheets, designed to be read with carriage and horse in mind, distances marked in miles and landmarks carefully noted, so that travelers could measure both space and time with a gentle, ordered understanding. The maps are narrow strips, often called strip maps, presenting one route at a time, winding like a ribbon across the page, annotated with towns, bridges, rivers, and hills. Though intended as practical guides, the sheets themselves are small treasures, printed with care, their original copies rare and highly valued today. They reflect not only geography but a certain rhythm of travel, the stop and go of coaching inns, the soft rise and fall of the land, and the sense of a country stitched together by human paths. Pause now to imagine an early traveler unrolling a sheet on a wooden table, reading distances and small pictorial cues, feeling the quiet certainty of measured space in ink, each mile a gentle step in understanding. Ogilby's work quietly bridged the abstract world of maps and the lived experience of moving across a familiar yet complex land, its careful documentation whispering the steady pulse of roads that connected communities, commerce, and curiosity alike. Shifting forward to mid-18th century France, the Cassini maps began around 1756 as one of the earliest attempts at systematic, national-scale cartography. Under the careful direction of César François Cassini de Thury, surveyors crisscrossed the French countryside, measuring distances, angles, and elevations with chains, theodolites, and patient calculations, producing a topographical vision of a country both familiar and newly quantifiable. These maps were drawn on a 1:86,400 scale, with each sheet capturing villages, forests, rivers, and roads in fine detail, sometimes accompanied by engraved relief or hachures to suggest slopes. Though the project spanned decades and some sheets have been lost or damaged over time, the surviving plates offer a meticulous glimpse into 18th century France, not merely as a political territory, but as a physical landscape to be recorded, measured, and understood. One can almost hear the quiet tapping of measuring instruments across cobblestones, the scribbles of draftsmen, and the rustle of vellum as maps were prepared for publication. The Cassini maps embody the patient accumulation of national knowledge, reflecting the dedication of surveyors and engravers who labored in the soft cadence of observation, preserving the contours of France for both administration and posterity. Crossing continents and decades, the Survey of India, beginning in 1767 with the Great Trigonometrical Survey, undertook an extraordinary, patient effort to map the vast subcontinent. Although many of the earliest field maps are lost, the painstaking triangulations, astronomical observations, and incremental measurements laid the foundations of modern Indian cartography. Surveyors carried chains, theodolites, and astronomical instruments across rivers, plains, and mountains, recording each angle and distance with the diligence of a slow, meditative practice. The work spanned decades, producing both provisional sketches and detailed compiled maps that guided administrators, engineers, and future cartographers alike. These maps captured the rivers, mountains, and settlements with a precision that gradually replaced earlier, more impressionistic depictions, yet each surviving sheet reminds us of the laborious, quiet commitment of surveyors who endured long marches, monsoon rains, and the careful arithmetic of distance. Pause here to imagine the soft sun on a surveyor's paper, ink spreading delicately as coordinates and bearings were noted, and the vast Indian landscape slowly reduced to an intelligible network of points, lines, and contours. The survey's lost field maps whisper of patient inquiry and meticulous observation, forming the skeleton upon which centuries of geographic knowledge were gently built. In the gentle stirrings of the post-revolutionary United States, the new and amp, correct map of the United States by A. Buell, published in 1784, quietly captured the young nation at a delicate moment of formation. The original sheets have been lost, yet references and reproductions show a careful depiction of states, rivers, and nascent roads, blending existing colonial surveys with contemporary reports. Buell's map attempts to measure distances, chart waterways, and delineate borders that were still uncertain in places, translating fragments of information into a coherent, visual form. It includes annotations for settlements, topographical features, and navigable rivers, inviting readers to follow the contours of a still emerging country. Imagine the ink drying softly across paper, the printer's press leaving impressions of geography that would guide both imagination and movement in a nation defining itself. Though the original is gone, the map's influence lingered. Later cartographers consulted it, refined it, and extended its information, preserving the faint echo of Buell's careful labor. This early chart reminds us how fragile the record of knowledge can be, yet how persistent the attempt to capture a world in measured, thoughtful strokes. Across the borders of German-speaking Europe, Stielers Handatlas, initiated in 1817 by Adolf Stieler, presents a monumental effort in compiling comprehensive geographic knowledge into a single, coherent atlas. Comprising hundreds of plates, the atlas spans political, physical, and thematic maps, and though some plates have been lost or damaged over the centuries, the surviving volumes reflect painstaking engraving, meticulous coloring, and careful notation. Stieler's work integrates updated surveys, travelers' reports, and scientific measurements, rendering continents, countries, rivers, and mountain ranges with quiet authority and aesthetic care. The maps are detailed enough to convey geographic information accurately, yet still soft in their visual impression, with gentle shading and thoughtful labels. Imagine turning each folio slowly, tracing rivers with fingertips, noting the quiet order of towns and natural features, and sensing the human hand behind every careful line. Stielers Handatlas invites prolonged, unhurried study, where the very act of reading a map becomes a meditative experience, a slow journey across the measured world, punctuated by the reassuring rhythm of engraved ink and softly applied color. In the quiet valleys and alpine slopes of mid-19th century Switzerland, the Dufour map, completed in 1863, emerges as a patient labor of topographic observation and precise engraving. Under the careful supervision of General Guillaume-Henri Dufour, surveyors measured mountains, valleys, rivers, and settlements with triangulation instruments, chains, and meticulous calculations, producing a series of sheets that together depicted the Swiss Confederation with unparalleled accuracy for its time. Some sheets have been lost to history, leaving only fragments that hint at the totality of Dufour's endeavor, yet each surviving page exudes calm authority. Contour lines rise gently to suggest alpine relief, rivers meander in soft ink strokes, and villages nestle quietly in valleys as if resting under the careful eye of the surveyor. One might imagine the slow pace of measurement, the soft ticking of theodolites, the careful translation of angles into paper, and the patient compilation into engraved plates, each sheet a miniature landscape preserved for study and planning. The Dufour map was used both for civil purposes and military preparation, yet it retains a quiet elegance, a record not only of geography but of disciplined observation, a snapshot of Switzerland's mountains and lakes captured in the deliberate hand of patient science, whispering centuries later through the preserved fragments. Across the ocean of time, the Lost at Sea treasure wreck chart, preserved in part by the Library of Congress and compiled in 1894, documents 111 shipwrecks scattered along various coasts, yet the original chart narratives remain fragmented and incomplete. The sheet captures maritime hazards, shoals, and anchorages, with annotations about wrecked vessels, many of which were laden with treasures, goods, or mundane cargoes slowly swallowed by the sea. Mariners relied on such charts to navigate treacherous waters, though often they survived only in partial copies or textual references. The soft, deliberate notation of hazards hints at the careful, slow observation required to avoid misfortune. Each listed wreck carries a whisper of human labor and maritime life, small stories preserved as coordinates and descriptions, reminding us that the sea is both a conduit and a trap, and that recording loss can be as methodical as recording discovery. Imagine the quiet work of scribes and surveyors, transferring knowledge from logs to charts, measuring depths with weighted lines, noting sandbars and reefs, and annotating with careful, patient script. The chart, though fragmented, embodies a meticulous commitment to order amid maritime chaos, a testament to human persistence and the quiet documentation of disaster for the benefit of future sailors. Turning to Switzerland again, the Siegfried map, completed in 1895, expands upon Dufour's pioneering work with detailed topographical and administrative mapping, producing a comprehensive atlas of the nation's physical and political geography. The map series employed rigorous triangulation and field surveys to record mountains, rivers, lakes, forests, and roads, as well as cantonal and municipal boundaries. Over time, several plates have been lost, yet the surviving sheets reveal a careful layering of information. Contour lines suggest elevation gently, settlements are noted in precise script, and forests are depicted with delicate shading to indicate density and type. The Siegfried map reflects not only geographic accuracy but also the slow, deliberate accumulation of knowledge across decades of observation, a quiet dialogue between the surveyor and the landscape. One can imagine cartographers carefully checking field notes, calculating angles, and transferring measurements onto copper plates with patience, producing sheets that balance functional clarity with aesthetic calm. Each sheet encourages the reader to move slowly across valleys and peaks in thought, tracing rivers, roads, and political borders in quiet contemplation, a gentle study of space, scale, and form preserved for both administration and the appreciation of meticulous craftsmanship. In the interwar years of Europe, the Atlante Internazionale published in Italy in 1927 represents a deliberate attempt to consolidate contemporary geographic knowledge into an international framework, yet many print runs have been lost, leaving only scattered copies. The atlas contains thematic and political maps, statistical charts, and sometimes artistic depictions of the globe's divisions, reflecting both Italy's intellectual engagement with modern cartography and the broader European interest in measured, global understanding. Its production required collaboration between editors, engravers, and printers, with attention to color application, lettering, and proportional scaling. Even lost print runs evoke a sense of patient human effort, the preparation of plates, the alignment of sheets, and the careful correction of earlier inaccuracies, all undertaken slowly and methodically. One can picture scholars in quiet rooms comparing maps, noting errors, and adjusting borders or city locations with gentle precision, each revision a small act of cartographic care. Though many original copies have vanished, the surviving examples preserve the atlas's calm, structured approach to world knowledge, an echo of interwar Europe's ambition to record and measure in both scientific and artistic terms. In the vast expanse of Soviet cartography, the Atlas Mirror of 1937 appears as a monumental effort to chart the known world under careful political and scholarly supervision, yet many editions were lost or censored, leaving the surviving volumes as rare and valuable witnesses. Its pages offer thematic, political, and physical maps, accompanied by meticulous textual annotation in Russian, reflecting both global knowledge and Soviet perspectives. The atlas was intended for education, diplomacy, and reference, compiled by teams of cartographers who measured, traced, and engraved each sheet with slow, deliberate care, often reconciling foreign surveys with domestic observations. Imagine the quiet coordination of multiple survey bureaus, the layering of corrections, and the alignment of scales to produce coherent representations of continents and countries far and near. Even the missing edition suggests the fragility of knowledge, and yet what remains conveys the patience and rigor of those who measured and depicted the earth with unwavering attention. Each surviving page invites careful contemplation, borders, rivers, mountains, and cities presented with disciplined clarity, the rhythm of lines and labels soothing to the mind, a reminder that careful observation, patient recording, and the gentle transmission of geographic knowledge can endure across decades, even amid loss and constraint. In the quiet rediscovery of the year 2000, the Book of Curiosities, an Islamic manuscript containing maps and cosmographic diagrams, emerged from obscurity after centuries of being lost to scholarship. Its pages, lavishly decorated with geometric patterns and finely drawn coastlines, reveal a medieval curiosity about the heavens, the seas, and the known world, capturing both terrestrial and celestial realms in meticulous, almost obsessive detail. The manuscript includes circular world maps, city plans, and sketches of strange creatures reported by travelers, blending empirical observation with imaginative interpretation, a gentle reminder that medieval science often intertwined fact and fable without hurry or judgment. Each diagram is accompanied by Arabic script describing locations, distances, and phenomena, written with patient precision, reflecting a culture that valued observation, compilation, and the careful recording of knowledge. One might picture scholars in dimly lit rooms, quill in hand, ink pulling softly on fine parchment, tracing coastlines and noting astronomical alignments, their work stretching over weeks and months, each line a slow meditation on space and proportion. The rediscovery allowed modern historians to peer into a world of methodical curiosity and thoughtful artistry, a bridge across centuries where maps served as both practical guides and aesthetic meditations, a delicate whisper of the medieval Islamic approach to understanding the cosmos and the earth, quietly preserved until modern eyes could trace its inked lines once more. The rediscovery of the Valsamler map, first created in 1507 and thought lost for centuries until it surfaced in 1901, presents a delicate story of preservation and patience. This map is historically significant for being the first to name the newly encountered continents America, a detail quietly recorded in Latin script along the eastern coastline of South America. The map was created in woodcut and printed on 12 panels, each etched with careful attention to coastlines, rivers, and islands, the projection attempting to balance nautical utility with general comprehension. When it entered public awareness in 2007, scholars could finally examine its carefully labeled ports, longitudes, and geographical annotations, appreciating both its technical precision and its aesthetic harmony. Picture the patient hands of Martin Valsamler and his colleagues in St. Di, measuring reports from sailors, translating travelers' tales, and adjusting previous maps into this coordinated vision of the world. Rivers, mountain ranges, and oceans are presented with subtle shading and line work, each element carefully considered to convey scale and relational geography, while the newly encountered lands were integrated into existing European knowledge without haste or exaggeration. The map's rediscovery allowed historians to trace the gradual diffusion of geographical knowledge across Europe, a quiet, deliberate accumulation of observation, annotation, and careful synthesis, where each labeled coastline and island whispers of human curiosity preserved in ink and vellum. In 2012, a peculiar phantom appeared on maps and slowly disappeared. Sandy Island, long charted in the Coral Sea between Australia and New Caledonia, was removed from modern maps after careful surveys revealed it did not exist. The island had been reported by 19th-century whalers and included in various nautical charts, each copy gently inherited from previous editions, its presence unquestioned until modern satellite and on-site verification could be undertaken. Imagine cartographers of old, transcribing reports with careful attention, transferring not only coordinates but also the soft authority of prior records, producing charts that mariners trusted for generations. When geographers approached the Coral Sea in 2012 with precise GPS instruments, they measured empty waters where Sandy Island was supposed to rise, and the absence was quietly recorded, the phantom gently erased from digital and printed atlases alike. This small episode illustrates the slow, accumulative nature of cartographic knowledge, where errors propagate softly through copies and the human urge to believe in prior authority competes with the meticulous verification of modern science. Each layer of mapping, from exploratory logs to engraved plates to digital databases, accumulates patiently, teaching us that maps are living documents, continuously corrected and refined, and that the disappearance of Sandy Island is as much a story of observation and correction as of loss, a gentle meditation on the reliability and impermanence of recorded knowledge. Turning now to a distant echo of antiquity, the Matteo mosaic map, discovered in 2024 through archaeological and epigraphic study, offered soft illumination of the ancient cityscape of the Holy Land. Originally a floor mosaic in a Byzantine church in Matteo, Jordan, it depicts cities, roads, and topography with remarkable precision, guiding archaeologists to previously lost sites with patient, meticulous interpretation. The map records the relative positions of Jerusalem, Jericho, and other towns, with rivers, hills, and roads laid out in tesserae of soft colors, each square a deliberate act of representation. Its rediscovery allowed slow tracing of the mosaic patterns, careful measurement, and cross-referencing with textual and archaeological evidence, reconstructing a landscape preserved in stone for centuries. Scholars noted the scale and orientation, comparing it to modern topography, while each fragment provides small yet persistent clues about the urban and regional geography of late antiquity. Imagine walking gently along the mosaic, fingers brushing the tesserae, imagining the artisans and planners who composed the map, transferring what they knew of the world into patterned stone, a lasting meditation on place and memory. The Matteo map reminds us that even in ancient times, the mapping of human settlements was an act of observation, recording, and subtle artistry, and that rediscovery centuries later continues the quiet transmission of knowledge, guiding present-day exploration with the same patient reverence as the original creators applied in arranging each tiny, deliberate stone. And so, from the gentle tesserae of Matteo, where ancient hands carefully recorded the contours of cities and roads, we drift softly back into the present, carrying with us the quiet patience of observation across centuries, a tender reminder that knowledge, though sometimes buried, lost, or forgotten, persists in subtle forms, waiting for slow, careful discovery. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.